Right, so I've wet the paper, and I'm quite happy just to allow that water to soak in a little bit. It's a heavy paper, as mentioned, 300-pound paper, 600 plus grams. So that's just going to soak in while we look at the colours briefly. So it's quite an extensive palette this time. Cerulean, Cobalt and Ultra Blue. 3 yellows, Raw Umber, Raw Sienna and Cadmium Yellow. And then 4 reds. We're looking at Cadmium Red, a colour I don't use very often, Burnt Sienna, Burnt Umber and Crimson. And the wash this time is going to be fairly loose. It's what I call a David Curtis wash. It's a technique he often begins with when he starts a watercolour. So it's a fairly indiscriminate layer of colour which is going to provide the base colour to build on. So there won't be a series of washes, unlike last time. We're just looking at adding some colour as an underlying wash that will build on later. Some of the wash will remain and will be part of the finished painting. Others, the majority, will build on. So we'll work with a fairly large brush, and I'm going to start at the top with some cerulean blue, just to bring in that nice sharp blue that you can see at the top on your photograph. As always, it is a challenge to work out the strength of these colours as you add them. But in this way, in this approach, we can look at adding to the colour as we work before we finish this part of the process. And you can see, and this I know offends some people, but I'm quite happy for some of these colours to go beyond where I need them to go. So you can see at the top here, I'm fairly happy to let the cerulean blue creep into the books at the top. Leave that a second and let's move to the bottom. So here, right at the bottom, I'm going to use just a little bit of raw sienna just to pull along the bottom of the bookcase. You can see on mine actually I lifted mine a little bit, so I've got a touch more beneath the edge of the bookshelf. We're looking at possibly burnt umber as the base colour for the fruits. And onto the shadow. Same with the other piece of fruit on this side. It's a bit strong, but never mind. And again, that's gone beyond where I need it to go. And then we're looking at the books. So initially, it's just using a colour that is sympathetic with what's going to happen later on. So that's those 3 books there. We've then got a crimson book. Perhaps a little bit of cadmium red, quite pale, to give me the orange book, and also I'll use that for this one on the end here. So that's a fairly opaque paint, is cadmium red. All the cadmiums are opaque colours. And then ultra for this, still got some red on the brush there, so be careful. A bit of ultra down here. Now, unlike last time when we were quite careful not to use single colours, to use fresh single colours in our wash, this time it doesn't matter if we actually decide to mix some of the colours. So I'm using a little bit of the ultra with the burnt umber, which will start to give me shadows. So we're quite happy on this occasion to mix some of the colours rather than just use neat colour. With a little bit more blue, maybe just to run down some of the edges where we get this dark definition between each of the books. Change my brush to a slightly smaller brush. This is a filbert brush, which points actually quite nicely. And the thing that's worth mentioning is just be careful that you don't start adding too much water in these mixers. There's enough water on my palette there to almost have a bath with, and that's going to be ample. So any colour I'm mixing hereafter to add will simply be using the water that's already on my palette. Colour I do like is just that little bit of warmth out the back here. Bring some of these colours down to help start with these reflections. Going for quite a strong dark, and this is almost a made up area here where I'm underneath the shelf. And this is running a little bit with the raw sienna I put on in the first instance. So now I'm just looking anywhere else where I can start to add a little more. The paper is beginning, not much, but beginning to dry. And the thing of course you can do is to take colour off as well as add it. So if I'm not happy about that, I can just take a little bit off. If I want to make sure that I've got the masking fluid plus a lighter tone next to it, we can just take a little bit off. Same with over here, and maybe just take a bit off that edge where it's run too much. Again, I'm working flat because I don't want there to be any running of colour where I can't control it. I'm going to go a little bit darker up here. The edges are beginning to dry now. Always when you wet the paper, it's the edges that dry first. The centre part tends to be the last, the centre part of your paper. So obviously I'm having a little bit more control as we come down the paper on the edges. Crimson's quite nice in there. So although I'm using the photograph for reference, I'm also just trying to use a little bit of imagination and where I want to place emphasis. Quite dark in there. Still very wet there, so I'm going to take a bit out of there. I think I'm almost there. The other thing this is leading towards is it's encouraging the painting not to be too tight, which I don't want it to be. I want it to be, it's a very structured subject, and I really want it to be a little bit less so in the painting. So I think I'm going to more or less leave it there, keep it flat, and just see what happens when it's dry. So I'll return shortly. I'm not going to show you any more painting part of the process, but what I'm going to do is show you this when it's dry and with the masking off, so you can see the stage I've got to before I start with the painting proper. What I might just do, just use a bit of ultra just to pick those out. You can go on and on with this, but I don't want to make it too fussy. But I do want to give some colour that's going to give me a really healthy start to the painting. It's going to move me on quite nicely. So there we go for the moment.